Hi. Wherever you are and whenever this is that you're listening to this, I hope you're having a wonderful time and that God has blessed you. So my name is Nathan Shaw. This is a recording of a sermon that I gave on 23 December of 2022 for an Erev Shabbat Hanukkah service. And I meant to record that one live. I didn't. This is a re-recording of that by request of several people. So here's my message. My grandmother once gave me these two sweaters for Hanukkah, right? So then the next time that we visited her, I made sure to wear one. And as we entered her home, instead of the smile that I expected, she said, "Nathan, what's the matter? You didn't like the other one?" So the story continues, of course, I knew this was bound to happen. So I took off the top sweater to reveal that I was wearing the other one underneath. And so I told Granny, I love them both so much, I couldn't decide which one to wear. All right, this is obviously a joke. None of this happened in real life. But it's a joke that, at least the first part, demonstrates a no-win situation for our grandmother that wouldn't have been pleased by wearing of either sweater because the other one would have been left out. And I thought it was sort of appropriate to tell this joke because the story of Hanukkah, in a way, is very similar to that. It starts out with a no-win situation. And you'll see that as we tell the story tonight, right? And I was extremely blessed to speak on that Erev Shabbat and at that Hanukkah service. It was truly an honor for me. And in this, I had three very closely related objectives. So one, I want to use the story of Hanukkah from the Maccabees to inspire faith in the prophecies of Scripture. All right. Then I want to show you how important the Maccabees were and still are in their mission that is ongoing, right? This mission that is still so very important. And then finally, if I can properly show those two things, you'll see why Hanukkah in its celebration and commemoration is still very important, right? And it's especially prophetically relevant to end time events. So a lot of this message is going to be a summary from my friend and mentor Joshua Kinnell's Hanukkah message from 2 years ago, right? And if there's one thing that I would like you to do after you hear this recording is go into the description. I'll either leave it there or in the comments section, links to where you can hear that message from him. All right. And so the way that this one is related to that is I borrow a few of the main thoughts that he has, but I leave much of his message untouched. So don't think you can hear this and you don't need to hear that. You should actually listen to both of these. All right. Some of my points are very different. All right. And that message is perhaps one of the most divinely inspired messages I've ever heard. And I really do hope you take me up on it and you listen to that one. All right. So why does the Hanukkah story inspire faith in the prophecies of Scripture? All right. So let me show you this. All right. First of all, I wish Maccabees was still considered Scripture. At certain times in history, it was. And although it did not make the final list when the Bible was canonized, does that mean that we shouldn't use it? Or does that mean that it's not historically accurate? No, I think we should still use it, and it is known to be historically accurate, even by secular scholars, right? They consider it very historically accurate of this account that occurred between the time period of the last prophets like Malachi and then the birth of Yeshua and the gospel writings that begin with Matthew. It's that time period right there, and it's been shown to be very accurate. All right, and so it's important, and that importance develops from it showing this really clear fulfillment of several major prophecies. All right, prophecies like what? All right, let's go to Daniel, and we can see how the prophecies get fulfilled. So the book of Daniel, it lays out a series of prophetic visions through which you can see a timeline of kingdoms and characters that will then rule until God's throne is established on earth. And it starts with a vision from King Nebuchadnezzar. Now, this vision that the king has is a statue with a head of gold. It has a chest and arms made of silver. Then its stomach and its thighs are made from brass. And then legs of iron going down to feet that are iron mixed with clay. And Daniel interprets this vision for the king as 4 kingdoms. All right, so the head represents Babylon, that current kingdom that King Nebuchadnezzar reigned over. The chest and the arms of silver were the ones that were coming next, the Medes and the Persians. The stomach and the waist of brass, stomach and the thighs of brass is this Greek empire. And then finally, the legs of iron is the Roman Empire. And then the remnants of the Roman Empire, which still exists today, is the feet of iron mixed with clay. All right. And so what you'll see is that, the Roman way of thinking is like Greco-Roman style of governance. Like it's still the main thing today, but it's mixed with other things. And so that's that clay that's mixed into the iron. It's the Roman culture that mixed with the Celts and the Slavs of Europe as Rome and its overall dominion began to disintegrate. All right. And you have, you may ask the question, like, why doesn't the British Empire, or the American dynasty, why aren't they listed in this prophecy? And the fact of it is they have just carried on that Roman Empire setup with a couple other influences. All right. And actually, they make up the toes, which are made of iron and clay, right? So it's prophesied that there will be 10 kingdoms coming from that Roman Empire. All right. Well, so what happens next? So then there's a different 4-kingdom vision given to Daniel. This occurs in chapter 7, but it's different metaphorical objects, a different picture. All right. But it's about the same 4 kingdoms. All right, but instead of a statue, this time it's 4 beasts. It begins with a lion, which is Babylon, then a bear, which is Media and Persia, then a leopard, which is Greece, and then finally there is a unknown. He doesn't know what to call this last creature, but it's a very beastly creature, and this is Rome, right? And in the way that the 4th part of the statue, the legs are of iron. Just a reminder that that's Rome, which goes down into feet that had 10 toes. All right, well, the 4th beast has 10 horns. All right, and these horns are these 10 smaller kingdoms that emerge out of the Roman Empire as it mixes with the European culture. So this is usually said to be like the French, the English, the Spanish, the Italians, the Dutch, the German, the Prussians, and then there's several other ones I just can't remember off the top of my head. But Daniel sees out of these 10 horns, there's a little horn that again begins to poke up. And in this way, this vision goes further than the statue vision. So the statue vision ends with a stone that smashes the statue, and the stone begins growing, and it turns into a mountain, and it takes over the entire world. All right. And so the interpretation of that is the stone is the God of heaven, usurping all kingdoms on earth. He established his own one kingdom, an everlasting kingdom. All right. Well, the vision of the 4 beast is a little narrower in time scope, and it's more focused on that 4th beast and what is going to be coming from him. So Daniel's given this interpretation that the 10 horns are the 10 smaller kingdoms, which come out of the Roman system or Western philosophy. And then the little horn that emerges is very troublesome to him. Daniel doesn't understand. And here's what the text says about that little horn in Daniel 7:24. It says, "And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall arise after them." He's talking about the little horn that he's already just mentioned. "And he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. And he shall speak great words against the Most High. He shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time, times, and the dividing of time." This phrase, a time, times, And a half a time or a divided time is used in three different places. This being the first one. Here, Daniel 7, it's used, right? Then in Daniel 12, and in Revelation 12, it's used again. The Hebrew phrase for this is Adon v'idanim ufelegedon, right? A year and then years, meaning another 2 years, and then another half a year, totaling 3.5 years. All three times that this is used is very clearly talking about the same 3.5 year reign of the little horn character, which we will discover is the Antichrist. All right. And Daniel's perplexed about this time. He's very distraught. He doesn't sleep or eat. He goes on fasting. All right. So what happens after he's given this vision about the times, and a dividing a time? He's given another vision, right? In the very next chapter, and actually beginning in the chapter 8, he's given this vision about another little horn. All right, the second vision, it leaves that four-kingdom model, right? The four-kingdom model, there's a statue first from Nebuchadnezzar, and then the four beasts, right? It leaves that model. It goes into this narrower timeline. And I'll summarize that vision real quick so we don't have to read a large portion of chapter 8. All right, but this dream is about a ram with horns that's bucking in all four directions, right? So north, south, east, and west. And then a he-goat comes flying in from the west, right? And I think this is to show, Western philosophy, Western culture, all right? And he destroys that ram. And then his horn grows very big, and then it breaks off, right? And then four horns grow in its place, and then a little horn grows up from them that goes toward the south and the east. All right, well, this little horn grows so big, and he magnifies himself. This is what it says. He magnifies himself against the Prince of Hosts. All right, something we already heard about in the other little horn vision. All right, and then Daniel overhears the two saints talking in his vision about the ram and the goat, and this is what this says in Daniel 8:13. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, How long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice, and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? And he said unto me, Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. All right, so the host are to be trodden underfoot for 6 1/3 year. So we're talking about a little horn, but in this one, we're talking about something different from the 3.5 year period. So it's a little horn character, but it's a different little horn character that the vision is being used to explain the pattern of the other little horn character. So the ram, the he-goat, and the horns from this vision we're talking about in Daniel 8 gets translated for Daniel in chapter 8, verse 20. Right? But even before that translation happens, like all the clues are there, which clearly and undeniably demonstrate that little horn Daniel's seeing is Antiochus Epiphanes. He will be the one to make the abomination that causes desolation in the temple. He will be the one to trod down the saints for that time period. And this is the translation given to Daniel. The ram, which thou sawest, having two horns, are the kings of Media and Persia. Right, and just pause there. All right, remember Darius is that one that comes in and usurps and destroys Babylon, basically taking it over from King Darius. Right, the ram which thou sawest having two horns are the kings of Media and Persia, and the rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Who was the first king of Grecia? It's Alexander the Great. So what happens in Maccabees 1, verse 1? It says, Alexander of Philip the Macedonian, who had smitten Darius of the Medes and the Persians reigned in his stead, the first over Greece. And then he dies, but before he does, he appoints 4 governors, right? The 4 horns. And then after he dies from one of the governed from one of the governed regions, after he dies, it names the southeast region, which is the Seleucid kingdom of Greece. One will arise. And so who is the little horn that emerges to take charge of the Seleucid kingdom? Well, it's Antiochus Epiphanes. What does he do? He grows really big. He grows his army and his power. He moves to the south, and there he conquers King Ptolemy of Egypt. And then, in line with the prophecy, he moves back to the east, and he comes back to the north to take the land of Israel. All right. There's another very strong clue that Antiochus Epiphanes is this precursor or picture of the final Antichrist. All right. For one, he's a really bad dude. All right. And he actually believed himself to be a god. Right. And that's the information that we're given that the Antichrist is going to claim. All right. But then through his actions, he established a globalist system, a one world religion. Right. This is what Antiochus did. It was called Hellenism. Right. And it was to be practiced by all people. But there's another thing. Encyclopedia Britannica, you can look this up. I mean, this is a very well-known fact. They translate Antiochus Epiphanes, not just them, everyone does, but I'm referencing Encyclopedia Britannica. His name means God manifest. And he really thought he was a god. All right. So here's the question, right? Is this the same little horn character that comes from the 10 kingdoms of the 4th beast? No. But this little horn character seen through Antiochus Epiphanes coming off of the he-goat is this echo in history, a shadow, a foretelling that's giving us details about that second little horn, what he's going to look like, how he's going to act. All right. And it's difficult because the second little horn is mentioned first, if you know what I mean. Like the little horn coming from the 10 kingdoms on the 4th beast, that one's mentioned first, but he actually comes second. All right. Ecclesiastes 1:9, this is written by King Solomon. It says, "That which hath been is that which shall be, and that which hath been done is that which shall be done, and there is nothing new under the sun." Right? And his point there is that history repeats itself, like it's cyclical. And you've probably heard that very common phrase that strong men create good times create weak men create hard times create strong men create good times, right? That's kind of like the pattern of all of history. Right? And so you can be informed about the future by looking at the past, right? Well, Paul was doing this. The Apostle Paul, he had the book of Daniel and he had the book of Maccabees, and he got this message. And he taught about the little horn character to the Thessalonians. You know, one thing that I disagree with the modern church is, well, they say that the Messiah can return any minute. They call this the doctrine of imminence. I've had some really good discussions about this. All right. But Paul addresses this very thought to the Thessalonians in his second letter to them. Paul says, 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 2, "Be not shaken in mind or be troubled, neither by spirit, nor by word, nor by letter as from us, as that the day of Christ is at hand." So he's saying, don't be thinking the day of Christ is coming, right? This is the day of Christ means the return of the Messiah. He says, "Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and the man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. You know, where's Paul getting this description of this son of perdition from? Like, who is he describing? What prophecy is he looking at? Well, it's the ones from Daniel. Like, he's looking at our text. He was telling the Thessalonians, hey, there's things that have to be checked off first. All right. Then Paul says the next verse, remember you not that when I was yet with you, I told you these things? And so it's historically recorded. Paul spent 3 weeks there in Thessalonica. And he's sitting there and he's teaching them the book of Daniel. He's showing the correlations to the Maccabees. He's explaining the Messiah's return. He's talking about the little horn. All right, well, let's do this. Let's go to Maccabees and see where we first find our little horn, our Antichrist character. All right, he shows up in Maccabees 1, verse 10. It says, and there came out of them a wicked root, Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes, son of Antiochus the king, who had been an hostage at Rome, and he reigned in the 137th year of the kingdoms of the Greeks. And in those days went there out of Israel wicked men, who persuaded many, saying, let us go and make a covenant with the heathen that are round about us, for since we departed from them, we've had much sorrow. All right, and in those two verses, you have the man of sin being revealed, and also the beginning of an apostasy. It keeps going, and Maccabees 1:14 says they built a place of exercise at Jerusalem according to the customs of the heathen. And they made themselves uncircumcised, and they forsook the holy covenant, and they joined themselves to the heathen and were sold to do mischief. So going back to what Paul and the Thessalonians were talking about, he said, remember, I told you about the prophecies of Daniel and the Antichrist and the apostasy. Then he says this in verse 7, for the mystery of the lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now restrains it will do so until he is out of the way. So what is the mystery of lawlessness? The short answer is this. It's the Antichrist spirit. And you see that in what Paul says next, verse 8. And then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord Yeshua will kill with the breath of his mouth and bring to nothing by the appearance of his coming. So the doctrine of imminence is false doctrine. The world isn't getting the second Antichrist, the next Antichrist, the one mentioned in Revelation and mentioned in Daniel 8. It's not getting that Antichrist until God's Spirit, which is restraining the lawless spirit, steps back and it lets it take over. And then the Antichrist steps onto the scene, ready to take over a world that's full of lawlessness already, full of apostasy. There's very few believers left, and the apostates are ready to crown him king. Right? And so my point is really one of these things that Paul is trying to point out, that part is already here. It's already started. And when he says lawlessness, I mean, what's the Greek word there? Antinomia, right? Against the law, against the Torah. And so this means, does it mean breaking the speed limit? Or does it mean like, I don't know, spitting on the sidewalk? That's illegal some places. No, this is anti-Torah mindset. And so this is why Maccabees is so important, because you see what the Antichrist policies are. You know what to look for in the future. Let's just look at the Antiochus policies real quick. They're listed out for us in Maccabees 1:41. Here's what it says. Moreover, King Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that they all should be one people, and every one of them should leave his laws. So all the heathen agreed according to the commandment of the king. Right? So the apostates, the world, everyone agrees, globalism. Verse 43, yea, many also of the Israelites consented to his religion, and they sacrificed unto idols and profaned the Sabbath. For the king had sent letters by messengers unto Jerusalem and the cities of Judah, that they should follow the strange laws of the land, and forbid burnt offerings and sacrifice and drink offerings in the temple, and that they should profane the Sabbaths and the festival days. So, no more temple worship. Like, forget God's Sabbath day, forget his established feast days. He's trying to make them forget about the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, the creator God. So he will be the one worshipped as God. All right. Then he keeps going in verse 46. And to pollute the sanctuary and the holy people. This is talking about the priest, right? So drive God out. Make sure he has no more priest. Then it continues. And set up altars and groves and chapels of idols and sacrifice swine's flesh and unclean beast. So it's full on going to idolatry, replacing holiness with uncleanness. And this is just a side point, but the sacrificing of the swine's flesh also means to eat it. The Hellenists, they ate all the sacrifices. Paul actually talks about this in many of his epistles, right? And the whole book of Second Maccabees, it tells how they were going from town to town, and this was the sign that they would use: eat the swine's flesh. If they said no, they would kill them, right? All right, it continues on in verse 48 of Maccabees 1, that they should also leave their children uncircumcised. This is the sign of the covenant. That's what circumcision is, right? So no more of that. Continues, and make their souls abominable with all manner of uncleanness and profanation, to the end that they might forget the law and change all the ordinances. So you know why this is so important? Because in our day, the modern church that says all these things that Antiochus is trying to do are completely acceptable. They say that Yeshua came, and with his death, he enacted the Antichrist policies. And this is the spirit of lawlessness that's already at work. When we say the Shema, right? It's a prayer that Daniel would say 3 times a day. It's a prayer that we say daily, right? We in that we say that we take these words, we're talking about the Torah, we bind them as a sign on our hand, and we let them be frontlets between our eyes. And this means that the law is evident in what we do. It's evident in how we think, our demonstrations of the Torah, right? And the Antichrist also has something that goes on the hand and the forehead. It's his mark, right? Now, is this talking about a literal mark or metaphorical mark? I haven't decided, but it's possible that it's also just lawless thoughts and actions, right? You do this thing, you are taking the mark, right? So I don't know what, back in Antiochus' time, taking the mark would have been eating the swine's flesh. This was the determining factor on whether you were good with him or you were to be killed, right? And so we've been on a constant slide away from a concrete foundation of the Torah. And for the church, it started happening a very long time ago. And now they seem to fall about 2 decades behind the rest of the world with what they consider, moral. And it's moral relativism and all the consequences that go along with that. And so the next verse in Maccabees 150, it says this: whosoever would not do according to the commandment of the king, he said he should die. I'm skipping down about 6 verses to chapter 1, verse 56. And when they had rent in pieces the books of the law, the Torah, which they found, they burnt them with fire. And whosoever was found with any book of the testament, or if any were committed to the law, the king's commandment was that they should be put to death. Wow. So let's look how the Maccabees respond to Antiochus' decree. All right, they knew this was coming eventually. The Maccabees, they lived in Modin, which is a smaller town. It's not Jerusalem. Jerusalem had been taken over before it gets to them. But eventually it shows up in their town. And when it does show up, one of the king's officers, to make them show their commitment to the king, to take that mark, that metaphorical mark, he erects an altar. And I believe the records say it was to Demetrius, right? And they ask Mattathias Maccabee to make that sacrifice. And they say if he does make it, he will be honored as the king's friend. He will be given all sorts of silver and gold. This is how he responds to that request. This is 1 Maccabees 2:19. Then Mattathias answered, and he spake with a loud voice, though all the nations that are under the king's dominion obey him, and fall away every one of them from the religion of their fathers, and give consent to his commandments, yet will I and my sons and my brethren walk in the covenant of our fathers. God forbid that we should forsake the law and the ordinances. We will not hearken to the king's words to go from our religion, either to the right hand or the left. Now when he had left speaking these words, there came one of the Jews in the sight of all to sacrifice on the altar, which was at Modin, according to the king's commandment. Which thing, when Mattathias saw it, he was inflamed with zeal, and his reins trembled, and neither could he forbear to show anger according to judgment. Wherefore he ran, and he slew him upon the altar. Also the king's commissioner, who compelled men to sacrifice, he killed at that time, and the altar he pulled down. Thus dealt he zealously for the law of God, like Phinehas did unto Zimri, the son of Salu. And Mattathias cried throughout the city with a loud voice, saying, Whosoever is zealous for the law, and maintaineth the covenant, let him follow me. So he and his sons fled into the mountains, and they left all that ever they had in the city. You know what happens next to them? Well, they and their families flee into the wilderness, into the mountains to keep the law, and God blesses them. All right, one thing you should follow up with this is in one of the next chapters, Mattathias, he dies while they're out there, not of anything except for old age. And on his deathbed, he charges his 5 sons to resist the king, to fight for their faith and for the covenant, and to uphold the Torah. And you should just pull up and read that. I'm not going to do it right now, but you should read that. I believe it's in Maccabees 4 or 5. Okay. It's very convicting. But he puts Judah in charge. And then what you realize is that there were other Jews who were faithful and had fled with their families out of the cities so that they could not be forced into the apostasy, that they could keep the Torah, and they began to meet up with them. And together they form this small fighting force. And this is the thing that I really want you to see in the story, is that God blesses their faithfulness, like, immensely. All right, not only did he provide for them in the mountains and in the wilderness, they won every battle with practically no losses. All right, so the first battle, Apollonius, a great warrior of that time, he comes out with what the text calls a great host, and Judah battles him and he kills him. And then one of the next battles is Saron, the prince of Syria. He brings an army which was described as a mighty host to subdue and kill the Maccabees. And this is what it says in Maccabees 3:17 as this battle is about to take place. Who, when they saw, this is talking about some of the Maccabees, some of the men there, when they saw that host coming to meet them, said unto Judah, How shall we be able, being so few, to fight against so great a multitude and so strong, seeing we are ready to faint with fasting all this day? Unto whom Judah answered, It is no hard matter for the many to be shut up in the hands of a few, and with the God of heaven it is all one, to deliver with a great multitude or a small company. For the victory of battle standeth not in the multitude of a host, but the strength that cometh from heaven. They come against us in much pride, in lawlessness, to destroy us, and our wives, and our children, and to spoil us. But we fight for our lives and our laws, wherefore the Lord himself will overthrow them before our face. And as for you, be not afraid of them. And so the outcome was that Judah and his small band killed 800 of these guys in battle, and then the rest fled. But when Antiochus hears about this, he becomes enraged, and he sends half of his army to destroy them, about 40,000 foot soldiers, 7,000 horsemen, and then a great number of elephants, I believe, which numbered around 80. And Judah and his 3,000 men, that's all he had. They fasted, they prayed, they took up a collection of first fruits, because actually the first fruits festival, which was given by God, was happening at that time. And they asked God in heaven to give them back the temple so that they could make a first fruits offering. Not many of these guys even had weapons. Very few had armor. But after they killed that first 4,000 of the enemy troops, the rest knew that there was some supernatural force involved, and they fled. And all of the recorded battles go very similar, right? The fear of that supernatural force that came with Judah Maccabee became known, and it made every soldier in the Greek army tremble and flee at that sight of this small ragtag band of rebels coming around the corner. Trained and hardened warriors, Greek and Syrian warriors, left their ranks and they deserted. So God answered the prayers of this faithful group, and he gave them every victory till they had won Jerusalem back and had taken control of the temple. So the core motivation of every one of the Hebrew warriors, like where their faith was coming from, was this belief that not forsaking the law of God, not becoming an apostate, was more important than life itself. That was the dedication spark that finally lit the menorah to rededicate the temple as a sanctuary for God. Let me ask you this. The church says that these laws that they were following, that they were ready to die for, are abolished. An earthly temple is pointless. Defilement by food is no longer a thing. Circumcision, the sign of the covenant, is now meaningless. You can do whatever in the world you want. That these institutions are abolished under what they call a doctrine of grace. But they've misunderstood what grace is. It's not the ability to do whatever you want and be absolved of sin. Paul says, should we continue in sin that grace may abound? And what he's doing, he's fighting against that interpretation that they have, because he continues and he says, God forbid, if you are dead to sin, you shouldn't continue in it. Therefore, it's not the ability to sin and be free of condemnation from God, but it's rather the supernatural strength to do what is right. And so the question that I was really trying to ask is, why would God perform all these miracles to sustain the Maccabees in their mission to uphold his Torah if he was getting ready to abolish it in less than 200 years? Doesn't make sense. It's 100%. It's incongruous to me. I can't imagine it. Furthermore, we know that's not the case, actually, because furthermore, Yeshua himself, he comes and he says in his very first sermon, do not think that I come to abolish the Torah and the prophets. Until heaven and earth pass away, no jot or tittle shall in no wise pass from the law until all is fulfilled. And when he says fulfilled here, he's talking about heaven and earth pass away. That's that line that he's talking about when it's fulfilled. When everything is gone, then maybe the Torah is gone. But and as long as there's somebody here to keep the Torah remains. So back to the story, right? So Judah, they win back Jerusalem, they win back the temple, and then he finds some Levites, some from the priesthood that have not been defiled, who could advise on reinstituting everything, bringing the temple back to a state of purity where God could re-inhabit it. This was very important to them. All right. And so they discussed cleansing the altar, but quickly they decided that the swine that had been sacrificed on the altar had defiled it beyond repair. So they removed those stones and they found new stones to rebuild the altar. Then on the 25th day of Kislev of the Hebrew calendar, their work of cleaning and repairing the temple, it was complete. Right? And this was all done in accordance with the pattern listed in the Torah. They get ready to dedicate it. They place the incense. They place the table of showbread. They put in and they lit the incense and then the menorah. And here's what it says about this dedication event, right? This is Maccabees 4:56. And so they kept the dedication of the altar 8 days, and they offered burnt offerings with gladness, and they sacrificed the sacrifice of deliverance and praise. And they decked also the forefront of the temple with crowns of gold, with shields. And the gates and the chambers they renewed, and they hanged doors upon them. Thus was there very great gladness among the people, for that the reproach of the heathen was put away. Moreover, Judah and his brethren, with the whole congregation of Israel, ordained that the days of the dedication of the altar should be kept in their season from year to year by the space of 8 days, from the 25th day of the month of Kislev, with mirth and gladness. So this is a question that I've had is, why does the festival last 8 days? Why do they ordain it for 8 days here? Why do we still keep it, right? This actually isn't known for sure, I think. But I think it actually goes back to the prayer that Judah and the Maccabees pray that they be given the temple back to make the first fruits offering, which occurs after the eighth day, occurs on the 8th day of the Feast of Passover, right? It could also be that in the book of 1 Kings chapter 8 and in 2 Chronicles chapter 7, we're told how Solomon built the temple. He dedicated it for 8 days and held a convocation on the 8th day. And essentially, they could be following either one of those patterns, the Passover or the dedication that Solomon did. But even while one of those is likely the answer for that, there's a story that's told to simplify the explanation of that 8-day time period. And it's called the miracle of the oil. And it goes something like this, that they found a single jar of oil while they were cleaning up the temple, and it would be enough to keep the menorah burning for 1 day. Right? And they decided not to put off the dedication until they had enough oil to keep the lamp going. But if the lamp went out, then it went out. But miraculously, it burned for 8 days until more could be manufactured and brought in to keep it burning continuously. But there's a little problem with this story, though. It isn't recorded in history anywhere. And if it was certainly true, it would either be in Maccabees or the records of Josephus, which are very complete records of times and miracles, but it's not. And so while maybe it isn't factual, I think a reason a story like this is told is to highlight a theme that is everywhere throughout the story of Hanukkah and the book of Maccabees. What is the theme? It's the theme of miraculous sustainment, right? And in that same spirit, the Shehekianu blessing is said at the first night of Hanukkah, right? And the part of that specific from the Shehekianu blessing is Vahigianu Vayikimanu, or sorry, Shehekianu Vahigianu Vayikimanu Lizman Hazeh, which means you kept us alive, you enabled us, and you sustained us to reach this season. And it's in our song, Ma'ot Tzor, and the English version, The Rock of Ages, talks about sustainment, right? Miraculous sustainment. Throughout all the trials that the Maccabees went through, fleeing into the mountains, living in the deserts with their families, trying to get food, living in the elements, trying to make and find shelter, not only like that struggle, But from those conditions, making war and fighting back and winning against the greatest military power on earth with a tiny fraction of the soldiers, through all that, sustaining their faith, not to give up, not to take an easy road, right? All they would have to do is eat a little of the king's swine. They could come back to their homes. They could stop being persecuted. But they didn't. They remained faithful. Their faith never died down. That light in their hearts, it never went out. The burning in their souls, it never stopped. And while the tale of the oil is cool, it seems to me to be a tale that's trying to condense a principle that God sustains what matters to him. And then I think you can take that principle and further expand it out to say that dedication is a primary factor in that sustainment. God sustains what is dedicated to him. Right? And then you can use that story to show that how once the temple was dedicated, God sustained the lights. But the truest form of the story is that God sustained the dedication, or God sustained the Maccabees because of their dedication. So their hearts, that's where the dedication first took place, leading to the dedication of the altar and then the dedication of the temple. Because God would have no interest in sustaining things that are not dedicated to him, or he has little interest at least. But his name becomes wrapped up in the things and the items that are dedicated for his purpose. And he won't let those fail. And so remember that Paul said that the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Don't have no doubts about that. Have no doubts. All right? The spirit of lawlessness, the spirit of the Antichrist, its main purpose, as demonstrated in the decrees of Antiochus and the future decrees, that our descendants, our progeny, they will see it. Those will be to pull them away from the law of God, to become undedicated to his higher calling of righteousness. So why is Hanukkah important? It's a reminder to repel and reject the Hellenistic pursuits of the Greeks, self-centered pleasures, and then, like our ancestors, to be sustained and to be rededicated to the Creator in the Messiah, who without him there is no purpose. And that's the end of my message. Thank you for listening.